Methuselah was the longest living man on earth, spanning centuries as the world around him grew darker and darker. The last of a line of righteous men, he remained faithful to God, even when few others did. Alongside his grandson Noah, he saw signs of what was to come and kept alive the hope of a divine promise. This is the story of Methuselah, who, with his simple and faith-filled life, left a legacy that spans generations. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting biblical stories and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like the content, don't forget to send a thanks a lot. And if you want to support the channel even more, become a member and gain access to exclusive benefits. Methuselah was born in a time of unrest. His father, Enoch, was known for his singular devotion and for walking side by side with God in times when kindness became increasingly rare among men. The boy's arrival was seen as a divine gift, and Enoch, always attentive to signs from above, noticed something different about his son. There was a calm in his eyes that suggested he would bring profound meaning to his generation, something beyond immediate comprehension. Enoch, from an early age, dedicated himself to teaching his son the words and secrets of the Most High, showing him how to stay away from the evil that was growing around him. The father narrated ancient stories about the creation of the world, the beauty of the Garden of Eden, and God's promises to the righteous, planting in Methuselah's heart the importance of remaining intact. There was, however, a feeling that hung heavy in the air. The elders said dark times were coming, but like Enoch, Methuselah was seen as a light in the midst of darkness. As he grew up, Methuselah observed the example of his father, who at the age of 365 had a mysterious end. Enoch simply disappeared. Men said he had been taken by God. Without fully understanding, Methuselah now found himself with the responsibility of continuing the path left by his father. Every memory, every teaching echoed in his mind like a mission to be accomplished. And so he walked, immersed in his purpose, while the world around him became darker and darker, awaiting what was yet to come. After Enoch's departure, Methuselah became a symbol of hope for his family and for those few who still sought the path of righteousness. He carried not only his father's inheritance, but also the weight of a world that seemed to move further and further away from God. With each passing day, he saw violence and corruption spread like a plague. It was a dark time, where few had the courage to look up to the sky for guidance. Methuselah, however, remembered his father's words well. Enoch had told him that even if evil seemed to win, God's promise would never fail. There was a deep peace in the memories of his father's teachings, which he now tried to pass on, as if each lesson were a seed planted in the midst of chaos. He knew that keeping faith was like treading dangerous ground, but Enoch's voice echoed in his heart, encouraging him to endure, even when darkness seemed ready to swallow everything around him. Time passed, and Methuselah became a father. Lamech, his son, inherited the same deep look that had once been Enoch's, and Methuselah felt the same responsibility that his father had had. He knew he needed to prepare Lamech for the challenges of a world where good was always at risk of being suffocated by growing evil. And so, day after day, he passed on to his son what he knew, the teachings that his father had left, and the hope that despite everything, a greater purpose guided their lives, even if it was still hidden in the shadows. With each passing year, Methuselah felt his father's absence like an invisible weight, something that made him seek God's presence even more. He remembered Enoch's face when he spoke of deep things, of mysteries that only he seemed to know, and of the peace that surrounded his father, a peace that was not of this world. Enoch always repeated that everything was under God's care, and that Methuselah himself would someday understand the purpose of each thing. But deep down, there was something that Methuselah could never forget: the day his father left. Enoch disappeared in a way as mysterious as his life had been. Methuselah looked for him, called his name, searched every corner of the mountains and valleys, but found no trace. That was when he realized that Enoch had not been removed by the hand of a man, but by the hands of God himself. The elders whispered that Enoch had been spared the evil of men, taken to the Creator as a reward for his faithfulness. At the same time that this disappearance filled him with sadness, it also brought him a new responsibility. Methuselah knew that it was now up to him to maintain what Enoch had left. In every word he conveyed to Lamech, in every silent prayer, he sought to imitate his father's fidelity, certain that what was to come would require all his faith and then some. He felt in the depths of his soul that something great was approaching, something that would change the history of everyone who lived on earth. As Methuselah grew older, the world around him seemed to plunge deeper and deeper into darkness. Evil spread across the countryside and cities, and it was difficult to find someone who kept their heart focused on good. Hatred, greed, and violence became almost laws among men, and what little goodness remained seemed to be suffocated by selfish interests. It was as if the earth had become a place where only sin thrived, and where the righteous, like Methuselah, were seen almost as strangers, figures from another time. Still, he stood his ground. Methuselah carried with him the memories of Enoch, the ancient promises and the stories that his father had left. In his soul, he knew that every act of kindness, no matter how small, still had special value before God. But the difficulties of resisting were increasingly greater. The weight of men's corruption was something the world had never seen, and sometimes he himself found himself tired, feeling the weight of the years and the emptiness that the losses left. There was, however, something more. Methuselah noticed signs that sent a chill down his spine: strange behavior, more violent storms, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The wise men and elders murmured about the wrath of God, about a time of judgment that seemed to be approaching, and although he didn't understand exactly what was about to happen, he felt his heart tightening like someone seeing a cloudy sky about to collapse in a storm. In the midst of this dark scenario, Methuselah clung to hope, but he knew he needed to prepare his family. He needed to teach Lamech and others the value of faith, as Enoch had done with him. Methuselah realized that the world around him was deteriorating, but he knew that there was still a task to accomplish, a mission that he would carry until his last days. Time followed its course, and Methuselah, already old, saw his family grow. Lamech, his son, had become a man, and soon Methuselah became a grandfather, and as his father had done, he dedicated himself to passing on to his descendants the teachings he had received, the same ones that Enoch had planted in him with so much zeal. He felt that with each teaching passed on to Lamech and his grandchildren, he strengthened the only thing that could resist the evil of the world: faith. Methuselah and Lamech were reserved men, and their family knew that there was a silent mission between them, a purpose that always kept them attentive and firm. Methuselah watched Lamech with the contained pride of someone who sees the future in the next generation, but also with a shadow of concern. He knew that the days ahead would not be easier than those he himself had faced. The stories that Lamech heard since he was little were now told to his children, and so the lineage of the righteous continued alive, like a flame hidden in the midst of darkness. Then came the birth of his grandson, Noah. From the first moment he looked at the boy, Methuselah felt something different. There was a shine, a purity in Noah's eyes that reminded him of the days when his own father, Enoch, spoke of promises and God's covenant. Lamech also realized that his son was special, and together Methuselah and he strived to teach Noah about what really mattered, the truth that cannot be lost, even in a world that seems to have completely forgotten about God. As he watched Noah grow, Methuselah wondered if he would be the answer to the mysteries that Enoch livore without revealing. In his grandson's eyes, he felt the continuity of what he had been keeping all his life. And he knew that, just as he had once listened to his father, now Noah listened to everything with deep attention, as if he understood that the time would soon come for a new generation to carry on that mission. Time progressed, and the premonitions that Methuselah had felt since he was young began to manifest themselves in more intense ways, dark and clear. Strange and unsettling signs appeared in heaven and earth, as if something was stirring in the depths of creation, announcing an imminent change. The winds blew stronger, the nights seemed darker, and at times the very air around them seemed filled with a heavy silence. A silence that the most sensitive perceived as the harbinger of something much greater. Among the villages, ancient prophets and sages began to murmur about an approaching judgment. They said that God would no longer tolerate the wickedness of men, that he would send a purification to wash away all the corruption spread across the earth. Methuselah, who always carried a deep respect for divine justice, heard these prophecies with a different weight. He felt that the words of the prophets were intertwined with the last messages that his father, Enoch, had confided to him before leaving, never to be seen again. In his heart, Methuselah wondered if these warnings were, in fact, the end of the mission that he and his lineage had been carrying out for so many generations. When he was with Noah, he saw the same apprehension in the boy, a silent understanding that the stories he heard were not just moral lessons, but a warning that prepared him for something great and terrible at the same time. Each time the sky closed in thick clouds, Methuselah watched carefully, and he knew his grandson was watching too. Noah's gaze sought answers, and Methuselah, even in silence, knew that there was a purpose being fulfilled there. He continued to teach and observe, while the world around him seemed to dance on the edge of a precipice, awaiting the arrival of the unknown that drew closer and closer, like a storm about to break. The years passed, and as Methuselah grew older, Noah became a man. As time passed, the bond between them seemed to strengthen, as if they both knew, without needing words, that something sacred united them. Methuselah saw in his grandson the same determination that one day turned in his own father, Enoch. And somehow, I knew that the mission that had been passed down through the generations would find an even deeper purpose in Noah. Noah, from a young age, demonstrated an unusual wisdom, a seriousness that made him seem oblivious to the corruption that devoured the world around him. He was reserved, attentive, and listened to Methuselah's teachings with an open soul, absorbing every detail as if he understood that the essence of that wisdom would be crucial for the days to come. While the men around him sought only pleasure, power, and violence, Noah remained silent, observing the world with the eyes of someone who knew that time was short. In quiet moments, Methuselah told Noah about Enoch's disappearance, about the mysteries surrounding his great-grandfather's fate, and he also talked about the rumors of the ancients, about the visions of judgment that many were already announcing. Noah listened with a heavy heart, but with a certainty that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. He sensed that he would be part of this story, that the dark signs around him were a call to him. As the years passed, Noah became a father, and his own family began to grow, as if time was rushing forward, preparing the way for something that Methuselah, deep down, already knew was inevitable. And so, even without clear answers, the old man continued to guide him, increasingly sure that Noah carried within himself a greater mission, a responsibility that would challenge not only the strength of his faith, but the destiny of all humanity. Methuselah, with his many years, was now a figure of respect among men. There was no one who didn't know about his extraordinary longevity, something that for many was a mystery, almost like a sign from the heavens. Over the course of nearly a millennium of life, he had witnessed the rise and fall of generations, the spread of corruption among men, and the weakening of the bonds of kindness that had once sustained the earth. However, his presence was still like an anchor, a point of hope for those few who saw in him a reminder of a purer time when Enoch walked with God. Methuselah was seen as a guardian of ancient wisdom, someone who still carried with him the weight of everything he had learned and experienced. Among the elders, he was a voice that inspired respect and caution. Even though he was an old man, he remained attentive, especially next to Noah, his grandson, who was now also respected for his rectitude and seriousness. The two walked together through the field, observing the signs of the sky and discussing the ancient promises of God. Noah, who had heard so many stories and premonitions, felt the weight of that journey alongside his grandfather, and the world, plunged into chaos and violence, seemed closer and closer to a point of no return. Noah, now an adult, was no longer just the grandson of Methuselah, but a man who bore the same mark of righteousness as his great-grandfather Enoch once did, displayed. Methuselah saw this transformation in Noah with a mixture of pride and apprehension. He knew that the dark days were approaching and that Noah, despite his youth, already carried a burden too heavy for most men. Many times when the silence of the night enveloped them, Methuselah spoke to his grandson about God's patience and the promises he had made to the righteous. Noah listened attentively, as if each word were a precious secret, something he would need to remember in the most difficult moments. Methuselah's time was coming to an end. At 969 years old, he felt that his body, now heavy and tired, was calling him to rest. Even so, he remained firm, attentive to the signs, and above all, to what he still needed to convey to Noah. That year, the atmosphere seemed different. There was a restlessness in nature, as if the world itself was on the brink of an inevitable event. Methuselah perceived the strongest winds, the sky with dense and gloomy clouds, and the earth itself seemed to wait. Noah, who now understood the gravity of his grandfather's words, began to prepare in silence, following what he felt in his heart and the instructions of God, who was beginning to reveal himself to him. Methuselah watched him with a mixture of satisfaction and regret, knowing that his long life had led him to this very moment, the moment when he would prepare Noah for what was to come. He understood deep in his soul that his mission was complete, and that soon it would be Noah who would have to carry the burden of hope in a world that was falling apart. Then, in the same year that the heavens seemed thicker than ever, Methuselah left. His death, silent and serene, echoed like the last warning. The world, which barely noticed the loss of such a rare man, little imagined that with his departure a new cycle was about to begin, a cycle that Noah would have to face, alone, with his faith and courage as his only companions. With Methuselah's departure, Noah felt the weight of responsibility fall upon him once and for all. That constant and wise presence, which always guided his steps and prepared him for what was to come, was now only in the memories and teachings he carried in his heart. The days after Methuselah's death were silent, and Noah spent hours reflecting on all he had learned, knowing that the moment his grandfather feared and prophesied was approaching. Soon, God's instructions began to become clear to Noah. In dreams and visions, he understood that a great judgment was about to befall the world, and that only he and his family would be spared. There was something bitter and lonely about this revelation. But Noah knew that it was his responsibility to fulfill God's plan and build the great ark that would preserve life. Day after day, he devoted himself to construction. Each hammer blow was like an echo of the promise he carried. Onlookers came and watched him mockingly, unable to understand the purpose of his task. But Noah, firm in the faith he had inherited from his ancestors, persisted, guided by a force that went beyond human understanding. He knew that in some way he was continuing the legacy of Methuselah and Enoch, and that the mission of his lineage was about to be fulfilled. Noah's ark, immense and solid, began to take shape before everyone's perplexed eyes. Day after day, The noise of construction echoed through the valley, a sound that marked the end of an era. Noah, alongside his children, worked with the conviction of someone who knows there is no time to waste. And as he advanced in construction, the memories of Methuselah and Enoch gave him strength. He carried with him the voices of his ancestors, as if his every gesture was an echo of past generations. Then the animals started to arrive. They came in pairs, as if guided by an invisible force, and under the astonished gaze of the crowd, they entered the ark without hesitation. The people, confused and torn between fear and mockery, looked at Noah in disbelief, unable to understand the seriousness of what was happening. But Noah, with his heart at peace and his mind fixed on the promise, just continued. When the ark was finally ready and the sky began to darken with heavy clouds, Noah gathered his family and entered the great vessel. It was as if, as he walked through that door, he was carrying with him not only the hope of a new life, but the legacy of the righteous who came before him. Noah knew that from then on, his life and that of his family dependent of the faith and promise that God had made to his ancestors. And so, the story of Methuselah found its conclusion in the waters that would soon cover the earth. He who lived to see the age of men and his father's dreams now rested in the memory of Noah, who carried the future in his hands as the first drops of rain fell from the sky, sealing everyone's fate. As the ark closed, protecting Noah and his family, the memory of Methuselah and his long life remained alive. He, who lived for almost a millennium, was a symbol of patience and perseverance, someone who remained faithful in a world that was increasingly distancing itself from God. The story of Methuselah reminds us that life, however long, has a profound purpose when aligned with the right values. He waited and trusted, planting seeds of faith in those who would come later, even without seeing the outcome of his mission. Methuselah teaches us that patience is more than a virtue. It is the courage to believe that good has eternal value, regardless of difficult times. He knew that despite the corruption around him, God kept his promise, and this understanding sustained him to the end. Enoch, his father, had transmitted to him the secret of walking with God in silence and fidelity. Methuselah passed this legacy on to Noah, who would face the darkest challenge of his generation. When we look at the life of Methuselah, we see the power of a faith that endures, silent but unshakable. He didn't need to see the flood to know that his life had a purpose. And her story inspires us to be constant and faithful, to maintain hope even when the world seems to be moving in the opposite direction. The story of Methuselah, which extends to Noah, is a reminder that God keeps his promises and that our mission is to trust and remain firm until the end, knowing that our actions and our faith can pass through generations, just like life of Methuselah echoed through the centuries. If you like the story of Methuselah and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.